psyched to be here. I think that we'll head out here and look. I think we'll probably 22. All the 22 owners should go to the J22. All the J24 owners go to the J24. Charlie's going to go over the boat setup and answer questions and so forth, and I'll do the 22 and go over some setup and answer questions and things like that. Then we'll rig up, and we'd like to maybe get around to each boat and answer some personal questions if there are on each particular boat. And I think we're going to do a little lunch, and then head out, a quick lunch, and then head out and do some races, and hopefully get some chance to get on each boat and get some time with our teams and so forth. So that's kind of the plan for today. Pretty relaxed, and we're pretty much here just to help move the boat.
Yeah, this is, Mark just mentioned, this is a cell, obviously the hardest part of it. We saw it on the Doppler, and it's moving across, and then it's clear behind there, so I'm a forever optimist anyway. But it's going to clear up, and we're going to have a great day. We just might have to delay a little bit so we don't get totally soaked, but let this pass, and then we'll head out.
We never get back early. So,
Charlie, I followed the San Diego tuning guide. They're a little bit different, but it shows about making sure the spreaders, minimum length, and a specific spread depth of the spreaders, and it talks about that. So even though the tuning guides are different in some respects, some things in each can be applied to both boats. Just set, like you said, setting up the mast initially.
Definitely. I find that just talking, starting with mast preparation is kind of the first bullet point here we can really speak to. I find that sailing the J24, there's kind of like two different conditions. There's like a crossover at like 8 to 10 knots. And anything under that, you got to be really footy, and you just got to envision yourself kind of loading up your forestay with lots of sag, and putting lured telltale flowing all the time, keeping it pressed with a lot of power in it. And then all of a sudden you hit this like magic velocity where you can get away with pitching, bubbling in front of your gentleman. Does that kind of resonate? Does that make sense to you guys? And I think the key to that entire thing is obviously your headstay set. And so you're always trying to get the max J, the max length headstay. And if you haven't gone over all the numbers in the guide, that's obviously something you want to do. I mean, the J and the forestay are pretty preset, but the mast butt changes. So you want to kind of move your mast butt such that you're happy with your forestay sagging. And the way you do it, there's a measurement in here. You locate the third bolt back in from the bow, pulp it, and measure it to the IV where the mast depth is. And then there's like, I think it's 130 millimeters. Yeah, exactly. And that's, I've seen some, the rule is right now that it's got to be fixed, right? Your mast butt has to be fixed to the I-beam, but there's a lot of different ways to adjust it. There's set screws, and the only time I really adjust this when it's really late. If you go out in the morning and you know that you're going to be starting with the blade and the forecast is going to build, and it's like questionable whether or not you're going to be sailing. That's the only time I ever moved the mast butt on our boat.
Which way do you move?
What's that?
How do you move it? When you move it, what do you do?
So if it's real windy and
what do you do?
crazy which direction?
How far do you move it?
Oh, I push the butt forward to rig back.
Okay,
So just
to tighten that headstay.
Tighten the headstay.
right.
Okay.
How far do you move it?
I'd say 10 or 15 mil. Nothing major.
How small?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they obviously the measurements at the bottom go a long way at the top. So that's the only time I really touch that. Shroud tension. Do you guys all adjust your shroud tension pretty regularly? And you've all gone through with a loose gauge and you know where base is and you know how many turns it takes to get to each mark on the loose gauge so that it's a no-brainer and you have that like posted on your boat somewhere. So you start at base, which with our set of sails is 20-15, and that's a measurement on the loose gauge, 20 on the uppers, 15 on the lowers, and that's base. And then the next setting that we have for 10 to 13 knots, starting after 10 to 13 knots, we like to put it at 24-21. So obviously on the water with sails up and everything like that, the gauge isn't going to read correctly. So what you do is you do it all at the dock and you count the turns so you know when you're out there how many full turns it takes to get you from 20 on the uppers to 24. And it differs, on each rig. Older rigs are obviously softer and, usually require a couple more turns, definitely a higher base setting, and stuff like that. But also keep in mind that, there are ranges on here, right, in the guide, so 0 to 9, 10 to 13. They're not exactly going to be perfect, but it's a good benchmark, it's a good place to start. And from there, the only way to tell is to sight up the rig. And, there are obviously some determining factors in whether or not you're above the base or below the base, but some of them are, if you got a lot of chop, you're going to want to go looser on the rig. If it gets dying, you're going to want to go looser on the rig. Flat water, tighter on the rig. Building breeze, tighter on the rig. And all these things can, they come into play when you're adjusting your leads and all that stuff too, but especially with the rig. And you don't have to go, something that we do all the time on our boat is you don't have to go from one setting to the next setting. You can kind of fudge it, a couple turns here, a couple turns there, but it's always important to know what you put on, what you need to take off to get back to a calibrated setting, something you know.
Do you go on the Newport too? Do you go lighter in the 2015?
Yes, we do. We take a full turn off our lowers. 20s generally as light as we go. If we go lower on our uppers, we really just hope that we're not sailing at that point. But yes, we do go below base, but I mean that's just a full turn off on the lowers. And then again, it takes somebody sighting up the rig to check your spoon and your poke. So when you look up the rig, you want, if anything, just erring on the side of spooning. Do you guys get what I'm saying when you're spooning? Just a little bit of sag, a lure?
Spooning and poke, you're having me.
Okay. So when you're looking up your rig, right, you're sighting up it when you're going to weather. A little bit of spoon, what I call spoon, is to lure.
Into the mast itself.
Into the mast.
So rather than straight up and down in columns.
So if we're going upwind like this on starboard tack and we're sighting at the mast and we look to lure it, a little bit of this, as opposed to, I guess I have to change it like this, which would be the poke.
Yep, looking up the mast.
So a little bit of poke, and heavy air is not bad, but like I said, in this lighter than 0 to 9, we take off a turn to get a little bit of spoon to make the boat a bit more forgiving.
I noticed on your website
The luff group from the back of the boat sighting forward with the main up, you're going to want about an inch of sag all the time, and you're basically tweaking the uppers and the lowers and the head state to keep that constant, if you will, because as the breeze comes up and those rigs tension is lighter, it just that sag is just going to increase, and the boat's going to be overpowered and want to tip over and have a lot of helm and be kind of hard to keep on its feet. It'll kind of be going sideways. It's kind of like sailing around with your outhaul completely eased and 18 knots of breeze. The boat's just going to want to, it's not going to feel right, and you're going to want to heel over and go sideways. So basically what you're looking for is when you sight up the groove, you're looking to have that inch, 3/4 of an inch to an inch of mast sag all the time. The boat, the way the sails are, and the square footage, if you will, on both the main and the jib, the boat needs a lot of power through the wind range. When you get above 18 knots, then what you're looking for is the mast to be pretty straight.
And you make that adjustment with your lowers?
Correct, yeah, and you'll have to take some upper shroud too, because at that point the top's going to be dumping off. Yeah. So
But that's, you notice that sag, is that the area that
Yeah,
you
yeah.
see that in?
Yeah, 50% of the mast. Yeah.
So I'm drawing an imaginary line, top to bottom, and looking at where that mast is in relationship to the mast, the side.
To leeward, yeah. You never want it to poke to weather. If it's poking to weather, then you probably need more upper shroud tension, and you may even have to ease off your lower. If say, what you're looking for is for the mast to sag to leeward, sag off to leeward. If you see it doing the opposite and sagging to weather, that means that the top of the mast is dumping off too much. So you're going to need to tighten your upper and maybe even ease off your lower to get to that sag. So what I would do is when I'm sailing the boat, I pretty much stick to these numbers, and then I'll put the sails up and I'll sail in, and I'll check. I'll have someone hold the helm. Or if there's someone else who does all the tuning, if you have someone on the boat that you trust and is with you every week at all the events, it's kind of nice to pass that job off to someone who can just make it their own, Basically sailing upwind, and you just check the leeward sag sight and make sure you're within that inch to 3/4 of an inch of sag. And then above all that is how does the boat feel? How does the boat feel on the helm? Does it have enough? Does it feel like it has enough power in the light stuff, or is it got too much power? So if it feels a little sluggish, then it's probably going to need to ease off the lowers at least, and maybe even the uppers and the head stay, just to give it some more power. So that's, or the opposite, if it feels like you have too much power and the boat's really heeling over and you can't, you're going to a lot of backstay and you're still overpowered, then you're going to need to tighten up everything.
That type of thing. So our guy, I think, in that case, would probably just have an extra wrap, maybe, so that he just kind of cleans it with his palm on the rail, and because he's easing and trimming so frequently. It's funny. I mean, the skipper, it's like a constant battle, at least on our boat and most of the other boats that I've sailed on. The Genoa trimmer is more of a Genoa easer, and the skipper's always kind of wanting to crank it in, and there are times. I know my turn, just he won't get tail from me. He'll say, you know what, you're wrong, and he'll just sit there and let me spin the winch. Nothing will happen. But yeah, exactly. But having said that, keeping the boat on its feet is enormous, and to do that, you got to keep the boat flat. And most of the easing is done with jet. If you get that Genoa out right away, I mean lake sailing especially in flat water, if you ease your Genoa and your main's still trimmed in, your boat's going to flatten out, but it's also going to carve off. It's going to carve the weather. And that's something you can just kind of staircase upwind, and when you heel over, you're going sideways. And the quickest way to get flat is just having the Genoa. And if it's a big enough puff that you're easing the main too, that's great, because the slot is staying the same. As you ease one sail, you ease the other. You can maintain flow over your foils going through the water, and hopefully, like I said before, just dig into weather. But the first thing that happens when we get into a puff, depending upon where the puff hits on the boat, if it's coming from whether if it's in the jib first, which it usually is, the big Genoa uses the thing that flattens the boat. And so, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, how do you explain how you can come up to weather when you're actually easing the sails out? I mean, because are you actually steering, or is it the velocity that's
not flipping sideways more?
Exactly. There's a couple things. I mean, if you were to go sailing in a J24 without or with a broken rudder, which is probably impossible because of the foil play. But if you were, say you're going out in a dinghy, right, and you're going out there without a rudder, if you trim the main, the boat heads up, right? If you trim the jib, the boat heads down. Conversely, if the main's in and the jib's eased, it's just like trimming in the main relative to it, so the boat's going to want to carve up. Because any trimming that goes on behind the keel makes the boat head up, and any trimming that goes on in front of the keel makes the boat head down. So if you easing the Genoa, not only does it keep the boat flat, like somebody was talking about, which prevents it from sliding to leeward, it actually, the easing of the jib lets the bow float up into the putt. And then as you trim it on again, you correct yourself and the bow comes back down to course. Does that make sense? So in puppy conditions, you're constantly staircasing to weather and keeping your boat flat and on its feet, at the same time. Where was that going to get me? Oh, so the way that we do our Genoa leads on our boat is we know roughly where our range is, from just doing it all the time. But then the way that we make sure they're in the right place is we over trim the Genoa and we see where it hits on the boat first. We kind of use the chain plates at the bottom and the spreader at the top. Do you guys know that method?
Yeah.
So, okay, yeah, I mean, that's just standard. That's how we do it. I mean, we check the break for telltales and make sure that it's even all the way down the luff. And then we over trim it all the way in. And in heavy air, we like it hitting the chain plates first before the spreaders, because that means that it's spilling and twisting off, and it's going to help keep the boat flat. And then, in the light air, the opposite. We have it hit, the spreaders first.
Medium
So it's a nice pull. And medium, exactly. Exactly. And you can figure out your settings. Something that you guys might want to think about, I don't know if you've done it already, is that the tracks, when they come from the factory, don't have nearly enough holes in them. So in between every hole, you're going to sync your own settings so that you have, like, instead of hole numbers, you can have increments of 0.5, I guess, on that system, but you just have more options with your general leads.
Just on your boat,
Yep.
how many holes are you moving from your lightest setting to your max?
I think it's like 5.
5.
Yeah, but I'd say more in terms of, because I'm not the one actually moving the car, obviously, but visually, when I
2
look at the
inches.
track,
3 inches.
yes, obviously the car takes up some space on the track. From where the actual pin is, I'd say 3 inches. And if you're going back further than that, you should kind of think about whether or not you should be. So just about the transition from the blade to the Genoa, which is always a topic of conversation. I think that you guys in flat water, you'd be more apt to go to the blade. In conditions where you're tacking more often, you'd be more apt to go to the blade. But what we've kind of established on our boat is that if there's a debate, it doesn't really matter. And if somebody on the boat is saying, if we don't have this sail up, we're going to get killed, then, that's the sail you should have up. But if you're kind of bickering about it and you can't decide, all things stay the same in those conditions where you're arguing, it's fine. What's that?
My ears are a little bit wet. What do you mean by go to the blade?
Go to the jib.
Go
Switch from the
over
Genoa.
Oh,
Just go.
Yeah, from the Genoa to the blade, or the jib.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Dry my ears up then?
So that's kind of the system that we've come up with. If somebody thinks it's glaringly obvious and they're not shaking their head, then you go with them. But if everybody's torn, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. There are, just like anything, you can sell yourself on either thing. The blade, this is its advantages, and these are,
Since we're on the blade, track positions on the blade.
we have.
We don't sail that much. We're always confused as to where the heck we should.
You know what? At that point, it's not your lead position.
I know.
We have one spot on our track that was, way more dug out than the rest, so that's where
That's
we
the one
lead.
that's what I've noticed too. So, all right.
That's where we lead.
We're on the same page.
And it's all about the ease of the trim at that point. And when you're in the blade, it's all about the ease of the trim, keeping the boat flat. Who's the heaviest? Who's minimizing tacks? All that kind of. Who got off the line the best? Walked into the bar, TV room, or whatever. Looked at the Doppler, and it looked like we were going to have actually a pretty good afternoon.